You spend your life trying to be enough for someone, for something, for an ideal that never materializes. You wake up and don the armor of effort, the smile that needs to be convincing, the kindness that needs to be constant, patience that needs to be infinite. You mold yourself every day to fit expectations that no one has ever explained properly, but that, somehow, you feel you must fulfill. And just when you think you finally fit in, you realize they've changed the mold. So you try again and again and again, until one day, between a forced smile and an uncomfortable sigh, a question begins to form deep down. Why, despite so much dedication, do I still feel this empty? Napoleon Hill would say this feeling isn't weakness. It's a symptom of a profound flaw in your order. You were taught to seek value in the reflection of others, when true power has always resided with those who look in them. From an early age, the world shapes your mind to depend on approval. Parents, teachers, lovers, bosses, all repeating the same: good, useful, beloved. And you learned. You learn to smile when you want to scream, to give in when you want to stay, to forgive before healing. Learn to confuse kindness with submission, humility with self-forgetfulness, love with emotional servitude. Hill called this social hypnosis, a state in which the human mind loses its own voice trying to follow someone else's tune. Gradually, you realize you've become a masked sculptor, that the face you show the world is no longer yours, and that your true self lives exiled in some silent corner of your soul, observing the spectacle and wondering when it will be called back. It is at this point that Hill emerges as a lucid, almost spiritual presence, guiding your gaze inward and asking, if your worth depends on being accepted, what happens when no one applauds you? This question echoes like thunder in your mind, because you know the answer. The silence of others becomes your own noise. The lack of recognition becomes a mirror of doubt. You begin to think something is wrong with you, when in fact, the error lies in the direction you've been looking all along. Hill believed that the mind is the most subtle and cruel battlefield. It is there that power is taken, or when you live to please, hand over control of your emotions to invisible hands. Allow someone else's mood to set the tone of your day. Let the gaze of others determine whether you are enough. It is a kind of modern slavery, silent, elegant, and completely socially acceptable. The world applauds the efforts of those who sacrifice themselves, but rarely understands the strength of those who decide to stop bleeding. Hill said there comes a time when human beings must make a spiritual choice, continue serving the world's demands, or begin serving their own truth. But this awakening hurts. It hurts because it dismantles identities that seem solid. It hurts because it questions everything you believe to be virtue. You begin to realize that perhaps you've confused love with fear of loss, empathy with fear of pleasing. Understand that often. Caring too much is just a disguised attempt to control what cannot be controlled. The other person's opinion, reaction, affection. And it is at this breaking point that Hill becomes a compass. He teaches that thought is creative energy, and that where you place your attention, you also place your power. All your energy goes into trying to please. The universe understands that you are a servant, even the kindest ones command no destiny. Hill believed that man is born with two forces in constant conflict: the instinct for freedom and the habit of submission. Freedom demands awareness. Submission demands comfort. And comfort, he warned, is the greatest enemy of evolution. When you become accustomed to seeking security and approval, soul falls asleep. You begin to fear judgment more than regret. You begin to choose what is acceptable, not what is true. And so, little by little, the mind loses the creative vibration that connected it to infinity. You survive, cease to live. Hill called this emotional living death, a state in which the body moves, but the spirit does not dream. However, there is always a moment when the soul rebels, a moment of silent lucidity when something within you whispers. This is the point at which power returns. Hill said that every rebirth begins with an act of mental courage, that of unlearning. Unlearning the fear of disappointment, unlearning the addiction to acceptance, unlearning the reflex of asking permission to exist. He believed that every thought is a command to life. As long as you think like a servant, the universe will respond with shackles. But when you begin to think like a creator, chains fall away, because the awakened mind ceases to bend. It's at this moment that you begin to understand what Hill really meant when he taught the power of positive thinking. It's not about naive optimism, about inner mastery. Thinking positively is asserting sovereignty. It's declaring, silently, nothing outside of me has the power to decide who I am. It's a spiritual act of non-submission. When this idea takes hold, everything changes. You begin to observe yourself with unprecedented clarity. You notice how you adapt to your surroundings so as not to disturb others. How you modulate your voice to be accepted. How you say yes so as not to be forgotten. Suddenly, all of this seems too small for the greatness you feel. Hill would say this is the moment the mind awakens to its true nature. a creative consciousness that never needed to prove anything. He believed the universe responds to the vibration of certainty, not necessity. Therefore, while you seek to prove your worth, the world keeps you on trial. But when you simply acknowledge your worth, the world begins to respond differently. It's as if circumstances reorganize around you. People who used you move away. Situations that held you back lose their power. The external chaos begins to quiet, not because the world has changed, but because you've stopped feeding it fear of. And this is where the first paradox of consciousness arrives. What seemed like weakness, the pain, the emptiness, the doubt, was actually a call to power. Hill said that discomfort is always the harbinger of that when the soul begins to hurt, because it's already growing beyond it. So instead of running away from pain, he taught us to listen to it, to look at it as if observing a teacher, because it's there at the point where you feel broken that the new begins. Maybe what you called failure was just life trying to free you from a role that no longer serves you. Maybe the silence of others is just space opening up for you to hear your own voice. Hill would say that the universe never punishes, only repositions. And when you finally understand this, something ignites a steady serenity, almost dangerous clarity. You stop chasing and start attracting. You stop asking and start declaring. You stop living as an echo and start being an origin. But before we move on, there's one last question Hill would leave hanging in the air, a question that's both an arrow and a mirror. You had to lose everything others think about you, still know who you are. If this answer still doesn't come easily, because the next step is waiting for you. There's a moment in life when you realize something is wrong. Don't know exactly. Everything seems fine. You work, talk, smile, post photos, fulfill your duties, and yet there's a strange, almost imperceptible sensation that you've lost control of your own. Napoleon Hill said this is the first sign that your mind has been hijacked, not by visible external forces, but by an invisible system of influences that feeds on your reaction. Emotional control, he explained, is rarely taken abruptly. It is granted little by little, every time you allow something outside of yourself to determine how you feel inside. Think about your average day. You wake up feeling refreshed, take a deep breath, and feel refreshed. Then, you pick up your phone. Old message, a lack of response, a sly comment, and suddenly something shifts inside you. Your chest tightens, your mind starts to spin, your mood changes. You don't realize it, but you've just handed over control of your emotional state to someone else. Hill called this the servant reflex, an unconscious habit of responding to external stimuli as if they were internal orders. A simple word from outside becomes a trigger that reprograms yourself. And it is like this, one fragment at a time, that the mind loses its sovereignty. Hill believed that the average human being lives in a constant state of emotional hypnosis, not the kind that puts us to sleep, but the kind that keeps us awake and obedient. The world knows this. People know this, even without full awareness. Use this mechanism all the time. When someone realizes they have the power to affect their mood, they also realize they manipulate their behavior. A silent form of domination, a kind of bargaining chip between souls. Those who control another's emotions feel important. Those who depend on theirs feel alive. It's an ancient dance, almost sacred in its perversity. And Hill called it the war of stimuli. Imagine a scene. You're having dinner in silence with someone. The mood seems neutral, but something changes in the other person's gaze. Subtle, almost imperceptible disdain, as if you've said something wrong without realizing it. You feel your body stiffen, trying to understand what happened, trying to correct. Please, explain. The person says nothing, just stares blankly. Minutes later, you're apologizing for something you don't even know what. Hill said this is the exact moment when power shifts. When you try to fix someone else's silence, you relinquish control of your own. And it's curious how this happens in small daily doses. A coworker who ignores you, and you spend the rest of the day analyzing every sentence. A friend who responds curtly, and you blame yourself. A family member who criticizes you, and you defend yourself even though you know you shouldn't. Hill taught that these micro-reactions are the links in mental. Every time you explain yourself to someone who hasn't asked, you reinforce the belief that you need to justify. It's as if you're telling the world, your gaze has more authority over me than the world, of course, accepts the invitation. Hill used to say that the human mind is a sensitive antenna and therefore needs to be trained to distinguish vibrations. Most people don't realize they're being driven by small emotional waves released by others. Criticism, silences, gestures, absences. He claimed that some people master this game with unconscious mastery. They don't need to shout to control you. A calculated pause, a disappointed look, hint of displeasure is enough. And you, wanting to be seen as good, correct, or kind, fall into the trap and become predictable. Hill said that predictability is a breeding ground for control. Those who know what destabilizes you also know how to guide you. But what intrigued Hill most wasn't human malice, but rather the fact that most people don't realize they're also complicit in their own manipulation. He argued that there's a hidden pleasure in that the brain, conditioned from an early age, feels a kind of chemical release when it responds to an emotional stimulus, visible addiction. You react and momentarily feel like you've regained control, when in fact you've just relinquished it. The mind, doped by the sensation of action, doesn't realize it's become a slave to provocation. Hill saw this as a sophisticated trap. Modern humans believe they are free because they can respond, but they ignore the fact that true freedom lies in being able to choose not to respond. He once told one of his students that he watched a businessman lose a multi-million-dollar deal, not because of incompetence, because of pride. The other side knew exactly what to say to hurt his vanity. All it took was a provocation, and acted. He raised his voice, wanting to prove his worth, and he lost. Hill noted, "He who reacts first obeys. He who observes in silence commands." This phrase has endured for decades as a subtle warning to all who confuse emotion with strength. True power, he said, is the ability to remain calm in the midst of chaos, to think when everyone else is feeling. The most disturbing thing is that control doesn't just occur in relationships with others, but also with one's own environment. How many times have you felt dominated by a piece of news, comment, a number in your bank account, reflection in the mirror? Hill said that anything that provokes fear, haste, or excessive guilt is a form of power acting on the untrained. Propaganda, comparison, lack, they all operate on the same frequency, that of stimulus and response. He compared it to a game of invisible strings. People constantly pull and are pulled, believing they are communicating, when in reality, they are merely exchanging control. There's something unsettling about this realization, because when you begin to understand the game, you also begin to notice how many times you've fueled it. How many times you've manipulated someone's silence to feel important. How many times you've ignored a message just to attract attention. Hill never treated this as a moral condemnation, but as an invitation to lucidity. Everyone, at some point, participates in the game. What differentiates the wise from the unconscious is that the wise recognize the pattern and decide to stop playing. They observe, understand the mechanics, gradually withdraw their own energy from the. Hill believed this deconditioning process gradual. First comes awareness, then comes resistance. You begin to notice that people keep trying to push the same buttons. Something inside you no longer reacts. It's disconcerting for them and for you. When a manipulator realizes they've lost access, they tend to increase the intensity. They become needier, more aggressive, more theatrical. Hill warned, this is the stage where many give up, because the mind, accustomed to giving in, feels guilty for not reacting. Silence feels wrong. Calmness feels like indifference. But he insisted, keep going. When the world can no longer move you, you've finally started to truly move. There's a tragic beauty in realizing how many invisible strings governed your mood. It's almost like waking from a dream where everyone seemed to have the password to your. Hill said this awakening is the beginning of true mastery. It's not isolation, it's clarity. You still feel, but you choose what deserves to be felt. You still listen, but you decide what deserved. And it's at this point that something changes. Silence ceases to be empty and becomes a shield. The gaze of others loses weight. Absence ceases to hurt. You begin to experience a freedom that is independent of any circumstance. But Hill knew the process doesn't end there, that the liberated mind still needs to learn to strengthen itself. As the world will continue to push old buttons, people will continue to seek answers. He said the challenge isn't to cut the cords, but to not create them again. Self-mastery is a daily exercise, and the price of inner freedom is constant vigilance over what affects your vibration. It's the discipline of not selling yourself emotionally with every look, every insult, every compliment. Hill saw this as a higher form of faith, the unshakable confidence that the center of power is and always has been within you. And perhaps this is the true mystery Hill wanted to reveal. Control isn't stolen, it's given. Every time you get angry, justify yourself, or blame yourself, you hand it over on a silver platter. But the moment you decide not to react, the power returns, silent, serene, unquestionable. It's in that moment that you understand that the world was never the problem. The problem was forgetting who the driver was. And when this awareness awakens, your perspective changes. You realize that nothing and no one can manipulate a mind that has already recognized its own worth. What once would have hurt you now simply passes. What once paralyzed you now dissolves. Hill called this the birth of the observer, the being who no longer gets lost in every emotion, because they've learned to observe their own mind without becoming confused with it. That's when control shifts. Stop being a puppet and become a maestro. But the real test comes later, when the world, sensing your new state, tries to provoke you again. What will you do when the next silence comes, when the cold stare returns, when indifference tries to hurt you? This is when the second stage of transformation begins. Hill said that this is where power must be exercised, not with arrogance, presence, because those who have learned to master their own reflection no longer bow to the mirror. There's a kind of fatigue that doesn't come from the body but from soul. It's the exhaustion of those who feel too much, of those who care about everything, about everyone, about every detail they say or don't say. Napoleon Hill would say, "This is the fatigue of the spirit, result of wasting energy on things that serve no purpose." He saw the act of caring as an invisible currency, and claimed that most people spend it unconsciously, as if they had infinite credit. But the truth is that caring all the time is costly. And when the bill arrives, it comes with anxiety, frustration, and loss of direction. You don't realize it, but you become indebted to your own peace. Hill taught that every thought is a unit of creative energy. Every time you worry about what you can't control, you transfer that energy to something that doesn't belong to you. It's like trying to light the world with the candle of your own soul. In the end, fire goes out, leaving only fatigue. He said that the human mind is a spiritual bank. What you invest grows, what you waste impoverishes you. Therefore, those who waste their emotions on things that don't nourish them end up emotionally bankrupt. And the problem is that, unlike money, no one realizes we're bankrupt inside. Exhaustion comes disguised as empathy, fear comes disguised as zeal, and dependence comes disguised as love. Have you ever wondered why you feel drained even after a seemingly peaceful? Why do certain conversations, certain encounters, certain people seem to drain your strength without a word? You'll believe that the world is driven by invisible energy exchanges, and that most people don't protect themselves. They enter any conversation, open up in any setting, get involved in any drama, and emerge from each one a little emptier. He called this mental leakage, fissure in consciousness that causes energy to escape out of guilt, fear, or the accepted. In his lectures, Hill often said that the first sign of someone who has lost control of their own mind is the rush to justify everything, the urge to explain, to apologize, to show good intentions. According to him, the need to prove purity is the clearest symptom of doubting your own. Those who are whole don't need to convince anyone they are whole. But society has taught us to prove everything: competence, love, kindness, loyalty. And while we try to prove it, we to live. Every explanation, small betrayal, of silence, a fragment of power, surrendered in exchange for acceptance. But why is it so hard to stop trying to please? Why does the brain seem to sabotage itself even when it knows it's being manipulated? Hill responded that the human mind is addicted to approval. Receiving attention, even negative attention, releases the same pleasure chemicals, compliment. It's like gambling. You almost always lose, but you keep playing because the possibility of gaining a moment of validation is addictive. The emotional system becomes accustomed to being fed from the outside, and the more you depend on this nourishment, the hungrier it becomes. Hill said, "This is the cycle of emotional servitude, and that the only way to break it is fast. Silence the addiction. Stop seeking reward." What would happen if you suddenly stopped reacting? If someone attacked you and you just stared? If they ignored you and you remained peaceful? Hill claimed that at that moment something extraordinary would happen. Energy would stop flowing and begin to accumulate. Silence would become power. The absence of response would transform into unshakable presence. This is what he called emotional economy, the state of being unyielding to a stimulus. When the energy that was previously lost in reactions begins to circulate within you, creative power is born. You begin to feel less need to be understood, and more desire to create, to act, to exist meaningfully. Hill once watched a young businessman lose everything he had except his serenity. When questioned, the man replied, "As long as I think, not defeated." Hill wrote down this phrase and taught it for the rest of his life. For him, defeat is never in what is lost, but in the moment one believes that the external defines the inner. Mental power, he said, is the last bastion of human freedom, a territory that can only be invaded if the owner allows. And yet most people surrender it without fight, trading autonomy for acceptance, clarity for emotion, focus for fear. Have you ever noticed that the world praises suffering disguised as virtue? That people value those who give themselves to the limit more than those who preserve themselves? Hill saw this as one of the greatest distortions of collective consciousness. He said that true altruism arises from abundance, never from scarcity. Only those who are full can overflow. Only those who know themselves can truly love. Otherwise, love becomes dependency, and kindness becomes emotional currency. He warned that excessive care for others is often the most subtle form of escape from oneself. It is easier to save someone than to face one's own emptiness. Hill asked, how many times have you hidden behind generosity? How many times have you helped someone not out of love but out of fear of being forgotten? How many times have you given what you couldn't give just to avoid dealing with the guilt of saying no? He believed that no is the most spiritual word there is because it defines the limits of your energy. Saying no isn't rejecting the other, it's protecting your own core. It's declaring that your life is not an open field for any emotional invasion. And until you learn to say no, the universe continues to test how far you can. Sometimes the price of caring too much is invisible but devastating. Start sleeping less, thinking more, and feeling guilty about resting. Your mind becomes a courtroom where you're both judge and defendant. Hill said that excessive emotional responsibility is one of the greatest robbers of vitality. When you try to solve what isn't yours, life burdens you with someone else's burden and throws you off. And the worst part is that this happens amidst applause. People call you strong, dedicated, kind-hearted. But deep down, what you really have is an exhausted human being trying to prove they deserve. Hill didn't see heroism, and he saw deception. He said that strength lies not in enduring everything, but in knowing what doesn't need to be endured. That true power comes from discernment, not resistance. This is why wise people are calm, not because they feel less, but because they expend energy only on what they asserted that each emotion should be treated as an investment. It doesn't bring a return of growth, it's a loss. And the enlightened human being is one who has learned to calculate the emotional value of each choice before expending themselves on it. But what if you decide today to care less about what doesn't nourish you? If you choose not to respond, not to justify yourself, not to try to please, Hill would say this would be the beginning of. At first, it would feel strange, perhaps even painful, because the silence reveals how much the noise dominated you. Little by little, you would feel something new. Space to think, to breathe, feel what is yours. It is in this space that lucidity is born. And when lucidity arrives, dependence disappears. Hill believed that the mind, when purified of excess worry, begins to operate on a different frequency, one that doesn't seek, but attracts. You stop chasing answers and start being the answer. You stop begging for attention and start radiating presence. And when this state takes hold, something subtle and powerful happens. The people who once drained you lose interest. Can't explain why, but they feel they no longer have access. And in that moment, you understand what Hill meant when he wrote that silent strength is the most feared of all. In the end, caring too much was never a sign of love. Fear of not being remembered, fear of not being important, fear of being alone. Hill said that the opposite of love is not hate, it's dependence. Because those who depend don't love, they just cling. True love for him begins. It's the state in which you can be with another without losing yourself and can be alone without feeling empty. Perhaps that's the point where everything changes. When you realize that the problem was never caring too much, caring wrong. That the energy you gave to others was the same energy the universe expected you to use to create your own. Hill said that the soul only finds rest when it returns to being a source, not a hostage. When you stop trying to be loved and start becoming love. And in that instant, the whole world finally stops draining you. Napoleon Hill believed that human power is not born of physical exertion or external circumstances, but of the direction of the mind. He said that the difference between the common man and the man of purpose is how they manage focus. One is distracted by the world, the other recreates it. And yet focus is something everyone easily loses, not out of weakness, but through seduction. We live surrounded by distractions disguised as important, and Hill often reminded us that most people are defeated not by a lack of talent, but by an inability to focus on what truly matters. For him, a scattered mind is like a shattered mirror. It reflects everything but illuminates nothing. Once, in one of his lectures, Hill recounted studying the behavior of over 25,000 people and coming to an uncomfortable conclusion. Over 90% of them gave up on their goals, not because they felt impossible, but because they lost focus. They started out enthusiastically, lost themselves in opinions, criticism, comparisons. He said the human mind is like a radio station. Each emotion changes its frequency. Those who constantly try to adjust to others' frequency lose their own signal. This is why many spend their lives in inner silence, even when surrounded by voices. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to lose energy over small things? A sarcastic comment, an unfair criticism, a provocative post. Attention shifts. Suddenly, what was essential seemed. Hill saw this as one of the most subtle forms of self-sabotage. The world knows how to manipulate emotions, and every digital stimulus, every controversy, every comparison is a way to disperse collective mental power. He believed that modern society is built to fragment the mind. The more divided the thought, the easier it is to control the masses. This idea, considered bold in its time, now seems almost prophetic. There's a psychological experiment Hill mentioned with fascination, a test conducted in a group of people were instructed to maintain their attention on a single task for 20 minutes without external interruptions. Only 3% succeeded. The other 97% surrendered to distractions, looks, noises, thoughts, memories. This led him to assert that concentration is the purest form of freedom a human being can achieve. He said that absolute focus is the portal through which the mind connects to infinite intelligence. But to achieve it, something few possess is required: emotional detachment. Hill explained that mismanaged emotion is the greatest enemy of focus. When you react, you lose energy. When you defend yourself, you lose clarity. When you try to prove something, you lose direction. He called this the erosion of creative force, the slow process by mind becomes dwells on useless details. This is why he taught the art of carefully selecting your. He said that each conflict you choose to fight must be worth the expenditure of your vital energy, because each emotional response is an investment of power. He who responds to everything ceases to create anything. But most impressively, Hill didn't preach isolation. On the contrary, he believed in active participation in the world, but with direction. He told the story of a man named Samuel, who worked as a waiter in a hotel for 17 years. No one noticed him until one day, a guest observed him taking discreet notes in a small notebook during a shift. The man asked what he wrote, and Samuel replied, "Every person I meet teaches me something about discipline, patience, or I'm learning from them all." Years later, Samuel became one of the chain's most respected managers, recognized for his ability to calmly resolve crises. When asked his secret, he quoted Hill, "Focusing isn't closing your eyes to the world. It's learning to see without getting lost." Hill believed that true focus isn't resistance to distraction, but discernment. A mind trained to see the essential stops reacting to everything. He said focus is like a lens that filters out the superfluous, amplifies purpose. But there's a cost: loneliness. Those who focus distance themselves from the noise. The noise hates to be. When you begin to concentrate intensely on something, the world around you tries to pull you back into distraction. People start calling you cold, distant, obsessed. Hill said this is the inevitable price of clarity. Those who don't understand their direction try to confuse their destiny. But what if the world is designed for precisely this? What if chaos is not an accident, but a method? Hill used to provoke his audiences with questions like these. He believed that large systems, political, economic, and even familial, are sustained by a kind of collective distraction. When everyone is busy reacting, no one is thinking. When everyone is trying to prove something, no one is creating anything. This is where focus becomes an act of rebellion. Focusing on building when everyone is arguing is a form of silent resistance. Hill believed that mental discipline was comparable to that of a monk in meditation, not through austerity, but through presence. He asserted that the mind that remains where the body is invincible. Most people live in another time, the body in the present, the thoughts in the past or future. And it is in this displacement that energy dissipates. When the mind returns to the present, it becomes dense, powerful, magnetic. Hill said that this density is what we call charisma. True charisma comes not from appearance, but from the coherence between what one feels, thinks, and does. He recounted meeting a man who, without saying a word, would silence everyone when he entered the room. It wasn't physical strength or formal authority. It was something invisible, yet palpable: presence. Hill called this the vibration of the centered mind. When someone masters their own focus, they emit an energy that organizes the environment. The opposite is also true. Confused people disorganize the space around them. It's as if the universe responds to the harmony or chaos of human mind. Have you ever noticed how serene people seem to move through the world without haste? Hill said that the quiet power of these people lies in not wasting thought. They don't rush to respond, they don't engage in pointless conflicts, and they rarely explain themselves. Not because they don't care, but because they know the value of each. We believe that words are instruments of energy, and that speaking without direction is like leaving a faucet running. Power is wasted without realizing. A focused mind speaks little, acts a lot, and exudes confidence. But the most curious thing is that Hill saw faith and focus as expressions of the same force. He said that believing intensely is simply focusing on the invisible until it becomes visible. Many called him an idealist, but he saw the world practically. Everything that exists was once an idea sustained by focus. No invention, no work, no empire was born by chance. It was born of a mind that refused to wander. Therefore, he said that every distraction is a form of spiritual theft, and that protecting the mind is the same as protecting the future. A student once asked him if it was possible to have focus and peace at the same time. Hill smiled and replied, "Focus is peace itself." He explained that mental suffering arises from the division between what we want, between what we feel, and what we show. When mind and action move together, the noise ceases. The world may shout, then the silence. This is the stillness of power. He said that tranquility is not the absence of movement, but inner alignment. When thought is in order, the universe is also organized. But what happens when someone reaches state? Hill believed that the world begins to test the new equilibrium. Unexpected distractions arise. Dubious opportunities arise. People reappear with promises or shortcomings. It's as if life is trying to confirm whether the focus is real or merely momentary. He said that this is the point at which many backtrack. They mistake tranquility for boredom and return to filling themselves with noise. Those who resist cross the invisible threshold between goal and creation. Hill called this the edge of mastery, the moment when the mind stops reacting and begins to command. When focus becomes so stable that the external no longer has the power to alter the internal, This is when man becomes magnetic, not because he seeks, but because he attracts. He said that in this state, the right opportunities appear on their own, not by chance, but by attunement. The universe responds to focus like a perfect echo. What you hold in mind manifests in matter. And that's why Hill insisted that focus is the highest form of faith. It's not blind belief, disciplined conviction. It's the art of staying focused, even when the whole world tries to distract you. He said, this is the secret of those who leave a legacy, not physical strength, nor luck, but the quiet constancy of those who have learned to keep their eyes firmly on the essential, while everyone else is looking. And in the end, this is how a person becomes untouchable, not by withdrawing from the world, but by finally learning to see it without getting. There comes a point when the mind, tired of defending itself, begins to see what has always been hidden. Napoleon Hill said, it's the moment when a person discovers that the true enemy was never outside, but within. Until that moment, you believe the world hurt you, the people, the circumstances, the injustices. But suddenly, you realize that what held you back wasn't the blow, the reaction. What exhausted you wasn't the problem, but the way you let it occupy your inner space. Hill called this the great reversal, the turning point when consciousness begins to realize that your entire life has been spent fighting reflexes, not the source. He said that most people react as if every insult were a genuine threat, a harsh word, and the heart races, a cold look, and the mind becomes a prison. Hill argued that this happens because we've been trained to believe that others have the power to define our worth. From childhood, we learn to depend on approval to feel at peace. This is why a simple silence can feel like rejection and an absence becomes a... He said that as long as the mind seeks recognition, it will be controlled by those who know how to deny it. And few realize how effective this control is. It's the game of emotional manipulation, played with the subtlest weapons: guilt, pity, love, and fear. But there comes a day when something snaps. It could be after a disappointment, a betrayal, or simply a deep exhaustion. It's as if you suddenly see the invisible strings the world has always pulled. And in that moment, the temptation to react arises, to scream, to cut, to run. Hill warned that this is the most dangerous moment, because when you react, you're still trapped in what you're trying to free yourself from. Reaction is the extension of reason. He said that true power isn't reacting, staying silent, not of cowardice, history. It's the kind of calm that confounds those who've always expected you to roll. Imagine a simple scene. Someone provokes you with sharp words, waiting for your trigger. You take a deep breath, feel the impulse rise, but decide not to put on a show. The silence stretches, the other begins to laugh. Hill said that this moment is the first victory of the new, because for the first time, emotion doesn't move you. Control is back on track. He called this the power of the observer, the ability to watch chaos without becoming part of it. It's a force that seems gentle, but it's power in its purest form. Have you ever noticed how silence disarms those who have off noise? Hill said that a manipulator depends on your reaction to it. When you don't react, they lose their identity. That's why silence is sometimes more powerful than 1,000 answers. But Hill knew that this kind of control requires a sacrifice, the ego. Because the ego wants to be right, it wants to prove itself, it wants to win the argument. He said that the ego is the greatest saboteur of freedom. As long as the mind is occupied trying to prove who is right, it will never be free. That's why the wisest learn to lose arguments and gain peace. But silence isn't always understood. When you begin to detach yourself from emotional games, the people around you feel the impact. Some pull away, others get angry, others try to provoke you even more. Hill said, this happens because your new frequency exposes others' imbalance. The world doesn't know how to handle someone who doesn't need to prove anything. Then come the friend who reappears out of nowhere. The person who tries to guilt you into changing. The environment that demands you return to who you were. Hill said each test is a disguised question. Are you truly in control of yourself? Or are you still feigning control? And it's at this point that fear tries to creep back in. Loneliness begins to weigh heavily. Doubt creeps. Have I gone too far? Am I being cold? That's when Hill would often intervene with his firm voice. Cold isn't the one who protects themselves. Cold is the one who manipulates. He explained that true emotional maturity isn't a lack of feeling. It's energy management. Those who control their feelings aren't insensitive. Free. They believe that emotion, when guided, is fuel. When uncontrolled, it's poison. The difference between failure and greatness lies in who decides what to do with their own. Hill once recounted the story of a woman who lost everything: husband, home, and job. Yet she remained serene. When asked how she managed, she replied, "They took what I had, not what I am." Hill told this story for decades, saying it was living proof that power lies mind refuses to yield. He said that when the world takes everything from someone and they remain standing, the universe bends. Because inner strength cannot be stolen, only given. Have you ever noticed that the more someone tries to control you, the more they fear losing you? Hill observed that authoritarian people are not strong. They are insecure. They need control because they fear their own emptiness. Knowing this changes everything. You stop fighting them and start observing them with little by little, you understand the secret. Hill repeated. You don't need to defeat others. Stop being defeated by yourself. He said this is the final stage of self-mastery, the moment when a human being stops seeking approval and starts seeking direction. The focus shifts from the outside to the inside. You begin to realize that peace doesn't depend on circumstance, on coherence. That life doesn't improve when the world changes, but when you stop being dragged along. Hill believed this awareness is the birth of a new form of power, silent power, that which doesn't need to be seen to transform. But there's a twist he always warned about. Power, once born, will always be tested. Soon after awakening, temptations arise, an unexpected criticism, seductive promise, an opportunity that appeals to the ego. Hill said that the universe, or entrusting you with greatness, needs to know if you're capable of wandering it. And tests come disguised as praise, love, causes. They are the most dangerous traps because they don't seem like traps. That's why he taught that true wisdom doesn't measure itself when wrong. When everything seems to be going, it's easy to maintain control in pain. The challenge is to maintain it in abundance. And then, almost without realizing it, you begin to change. What once kept you awake at night no longer matters. What once hurts you now passes like the world hasn't become lighter. It's you who's solid. Hill said that when the mind stabilizes, reality, people who no longer match your vibration, disappear. Situations that held you back lose their power. And what once seemed essential reveals itself to be mere noise. It's at this moment that true power is born. The power to no longer need to. But Hill always left one final warning. He said that when you achieve self-mastery, the world tries to label this serenity as coldness, arrogance, selfishness. It's the price of liberation. People project onto your silence the noise they still carry. And paradoxically, that's when you understand you've won, because you no longer need to explain yourself. The mind, finally, is no longer captive. Emotion, once a hostage, has become an ally. Power, once sought, now resides. And when you reach that point, Hill said, life changes texture. Other people's words no longer carry the same weight. Losses don't mean the end. Loneliness is no longer a punishment, it's a choice. Everything becomes simpler, and silence begins to sound like music. It's then that you understand that liberation was never about escaping the world, but about learning to walk within it without getting lost. And deep down, Hill knew that it was there. In that moment of serene lucidity, true purpose began, allowing the power that has always existed within you to finally manifest, not as a scream, but as a presence. There comes a moment when everything finally falls into place. Not because the world has changed, but because you've changed your way of seeing it. Napoleon Hill said that the greatest miracle of the human mind is its ability to transform perception. When you change your way of thinking, the universe responds like an echo, always been waiting for your news. It's the moment when chaos stops being an enemy and becomes a teacher. The same situations that once destabilized you become stepping stones. The same people who once hurt you now reveal how much you've grown. The power that once seemed distant, secret, or unattainable was within you all along, waiting only for your consciousness to command. Hill believed that mastering the mind is a sacred art, and that everyone, without exception, is born with this tool. The problem is that few learn to use it. Most spend their lives believing that control comes from outside, from money, status, love, luck. He said the mind is the invisible engine behind all these elements. What you believe, you create. What you fear, you attract. What you accept, you reinforce. Therefore, transformation doesn't begin when something happens, when you decide to stop reacting as you did before. And yet, it's important to understand that inner power isn't an achievement you keep, it's a choice you practice every day. On days when discouragement strikes, remember that even the sun seems to disappear for hours before rising again. The mind, like the body, also needs rest. Hill taught that silence is the fuel for creative thought. When you become silent within, ideas flow again. It seemed like a blockage became. You believe that the secret is not to think more, better. Directing mental energy toward what makes you evolve, not toward what makes you. This is the line that separates the man dominated by the world from the man who masters his own destiny. But Hill also said that knowledge without action is merely decoration for the mind. Therefore, he challenged his students to immediately apply what they learned, even if in small steps. The power of thought only becomes concrete when it transforms into action. He insisted, don't wait until you start now. Do what you can, with what you have, wherever you are. The world doesn't reward the idealist who only dreams, but the creator who acts. To dream is to see the future. To act is to bring it into the present. And at that point, Life shifts gears. You stop being a spectator and become. Practice begins when you learn to monitor what feeds your mind. Hill asserted that the mind is like a garden, and thoughts are the seeds. If you sow fear, you reap limitation. If you sow faith, you reap freedom. It's impossible to have a prosperous life with thoughts of scarcity, just as it's impossible to have peace with thoughts of guilt. He taught a simple but transformative exercise. Observe each thought that arises, and does this strengthen or weaken me? If it weakens, release it. If it strengthens, cultivate it. This simple practice, daily, changes the way the brain operates. When thoughts are purified, life follows suit. Hill also spoke about the importance of creating a noise-proof mental environment. Avoid unnecessary arguments, idle chatter, and pointless criticism. He said that every word is a form of energy, and that all energy spent on the superfluous is energy stolen from the essential. Therefore, choose what you consume, what you read, listen to. The mind needs clean nourishment, much as the body. And the more you filter what comes in, the stronger what comes out. This is how the inner voice is born, not as an echo of the world, as its own frequency, stable, serene, and powerful. But there's something Hill always repeated, with an almost spiritual gleam in his eye. No man can remain small once he understands the power of his own thoughts. He knew that this awareness transforms you forever. Once you experience the feeling of being at peace with yourself, no external manipulation has any effect. No silence threatens you. No rejection defines you. Tranquility ceases to be the absence of conflict and becomes a natural state. And what comes after that, something few understand. Serenity is not the end of the road. It is the beginning of true creation. From there, Hill taught how to redirect the power gained. He said the purpose is not just to protect yourself from the world, but to transform the world around you. Using self-mastery not to isolate yourself, but to inspire. Your peace is contagious. Your silent presence changes the environment. The energy of calm is more revolutionary than 1,000 speeches. When you act from a state of clarity rather than need, your life becomes living proof that balance is possible. This is where true influence is born, not because you want to be followed, but because the world feels secure in your steadfastness. And it's impossible to reach this state without faith. Hill saw faith as the supreme force of the mind, not religious faith, but the unshakable confidence that everything has a purpose. He said that faith is the compass that keeps man on track even when the map. It's what prevents fear from dictating decisions. When faith takes hold, the impossible ceases to exist because the believing mind begins to act in tune with what it desires. And, according to Hill, the entire universe conspires to support a determined mind. But beware of the most common trap, thinking that inner transformation is an end point. Hill warned that evolution is a never-ending process. Every day life will bring tests. People who try to pull you away from your center, news that provokes fear, memories that try to pull you back. The key is to remember that with each chosen response, you reaffirm who is in charge. No test is a punishment. All are opportunities to solidify the new you. And it is precisely through the small choices, what you think, what you say, what you tolerate, that your new reality is built. In the end, what Hill wanted to teach wasn't a technique, but a way of existing, with awareness, living with direction, purpose. He believed that every awakened mind is a spark that illuminates others, and that the simple act of freeing oneself from emotional chains changes the frequency of a higher place. When you become master of yourself, the world no longer needs to understand you. It simply feels your presence. Life becomes quieter, but also more meaningful. What once seemed empty begins to have meaning, because you've finally stopped chasing what doesn't belong, started building what completes you. And if you've made it this far, Hill would say that the awakening has already begun. That it wasn't by chance that you heard these words. They arrived because somewhere in your soul, there was a seed ready to germinate. Now the rest is up to you. Observe your thoughts, choose your battles, protect your energy, and forward. Even if no one notices, even if no one applauds. Because true triumph isn't being admired, it's being free. If these words resonated with you, if you'd like, leave a comment. You don't even need to say your name. Write what you felt, what you discovered, or simply say, I'm here. This will help the content reach those who need to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Together, we will continue this journey of awareness, strength, and transformation. Because, as Napoleon Hill taught, when the mind awakens, destiny follows.